you'll notice if you get the schedule that you can eat chametz till 10:52, and you can burn the chametz till 11:49. I mean, because that's the way the hours work out. They're not exactly 12-hour periods that we're talking about. So let's say for our argument's sake, just for our argument's sake, it's a perfect 12-hour day. So when would you have to get rid of the chametz by? 12 o'clock. Now, that would mean, in the Mishnah's terminology, the end of the 6th hour, starting the 7th hour, right? Because if 6 o'clock in the morning is hour number 1, then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 would be the beginning of the 6th, and 12 would be the beginning of the 7th. Right? Because that's what you see, the Mishnah there's no clocks and in the Mishnah's time. So they measure time by first hour, second hour, third hour. So for example, you're allowed to read Krishma the first 3 hours of the day. So till when would you allowed to read Krishma till?
6, 7, 8, 9.
9 o'clock. So
9 hours pass if you don't have a clock.
Oh, but because they would have some kind of a sundial, I would suspect some kind of an instrument that would tell you based upon how the sun moved in the sky, and you could tell like the increments on the wall or whatever. So that's how the Mishnah refers to different times. Now, there's a problem here. So you have to get rid of the chametz by 12 o'clock, but Mark has a good question. How do you know exactly 12 o'clock? And what if it's a cloudy day? And what if, this and that? So we know what do the rabbis normally do under these kind of circumstances? Exactly. They extend the time of getting rid of your chametz. So now this is the Mishnah. That's going to be what we're going to be dealing with in the Mishnah itself. Exactly when and where and how and what time we have to get rid of the chametz by. Now again, last week we talked about 3 ways of getting rid of the chametz. What are the 3 ways of getting rid of the chametz? Burn it is 1. Selling is 2.
And rent it is 2.
No, selling and renting is the same. It's the same.
Okay.
There's one other way.
I can't remember.
Come on, one other way. No, with the eating yes. That's what? Throwing it away, but that's like really burning and throwing it away. Second is selling it, and the third is when all else fails, what do?
Claim, you say, it doesn't belong to me.
You give up ownership. Thank you very much. You give up ownership. Okay, you have to remember those 3 because that's going to be on the test.
Okay.
Those 3 will be on the test. Okay, so read it again. 1, search and destroy. That's a search and destroy mission. When do we search the night before? Destroy the next day, as we'll talk about in the Mishnah. And sell it, which you do beforehand. And on that day itself, when you're burning it, you see there's a special little paragraph called Chamir v'Chamiya. You get rid of all the chametz. Okay.
So anything you didn't find,
whatever you can't find, you give up ownership for, and you're free and clear. You don't have to feel guilty. We're ready to go. Okay, we're ready to go.
but you're not allowed to eat matzah until actually the Seder starts.
Right. Now that deals on various customs. Certainly on the day of Pesach itself, you can't eat any matzah. Meaning on Monday, you're forbidden to eat any matzah because they want you to come in. We actually have a custom. We don't eat matzah from Purim for 30 days. And it's just a Chabad custom because, you want to anticipate, eating of the matzah. So it kind of gives you like
Because it tastes so good.
it's just delicious. It's just so
And then
delicious.
about the 5th day, it's like
5th day? How about the 5th hour?
Chinese parchment paper, my father used to call it.
You know that story with the blind guy?
You're going to tell them?
Yeah. He was given some shmur matzah. So the guy who was shmur matzah, he goes like this. He says, "Who wrote this nonsense on the shmur matzah?"
Is it required to eat the shmur matzah? Is it 2 days? Or?
Good evening. It depends again the custom. We eat only shmur matzah throughout the whole Pesach. But then there are others who. No, go ahead. That's your seat. Now, shmur matzah is watched matzah. Watched matzah, meaning that from the time that the harvest, it's taken down, there's a mashgiach there, there's someone watching the whole process, back and forth. Machine matzah, not that careful.
But it is watched.
It is, of course, it's watched, but like it's like following. It's like if you hired a guy to follow the wheat all the way through the process. It's an extra what we call chumrah. It's an extra, not leniency, but the opposite of leniency would be a stringency. Thank you. There's an extra stringency on the matzah. That's all shmur matzah is. Then there's machine shmura, then there's regular matzah. Don't get into it.
Do you
We'll get-
eat not the machine shmur? you
No,
eat
only shmura, only hand-baked shmura. That's
The
all we
whole
eat.
time.
The whole time.
No wonder it's
Hand-baked.
the 5th hour. that
Yeah,
you-
no, it's a 5th hour, but a 5th hour already screaming. When is Pesach over? When is Pesach over? Okay, so let's get to Mishnah number 4. Reb Meir says, Eichlin kol chamish, one is permitted to eat the entire 5th hour. Meaning, what would be the 5th hour?
10 o'clock?
10 o'clock. You're allowed to eat till 11 o'clock. Okay? Stop eating by 11 o'clock. Okay? V'sorfin b'tchila shesh. And you burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour. Okay? Which would mean, in the beginning of the 6th would be in 11 o'clock. So you,
I have the wrong document here. We both have.
what, you have the wrong document? Can I see the document, please?
Four, yeah, Martha.
No, because you're middle submished here. Okay, middle submished.
Maybe he doesn't know what shmur is.
I know what you're
He knows from Mishnahs. Tim knows everything. He's a scholar, the Tim.
That's right,
He can
that's
tell you
right.
from Mishnah 9 different languages.
I don't know what shmur matzah is.
Well, no? Oh, okay.
I do, yeah.
Now you know. Here, it's Mishnah Dalet of the first chapter. You had Mishnah Dalet of the second chapter. That's what here. So, 165. Look at page 165. Okay? You got that? Okay? So Reb Meir would argue, you have to eat, you're allowed to eat till 11, and you have to burn it in the beginning from 11 to 11:05, in the beginning of the 6th hour. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda says, Eichlin kol arba, you're allowed to eat it the entire 4th hour, which would be till 10. You have to stop by 10, right? Because the 4th hour would be 9, going to 10. Right, 5th hour and 6th hour, right? Right? Shall I eat it all not for till 10 o'clock? The toilen kol chamish, then it stays suspended all of the from 10 to 11. The sarfim b'tchila shesh, and you can burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour. He's a little more stringent than Reb Meir by 1 hour. He's a little more stringent by 1 hour.
Could you have burned it earlier?
Oh yeah. Sure, you could burn it.
This is
This is
the
the latest.
Okay.
This is the latest. So if you have to go to work in the morning by 7, 8 o'clock, you could burn it 7, 8 o'clock. That they don't care about. But it's the latest time that you have to get rid of it. Okay? Let's see what he says over here in the commentary concerning Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eichlin kol arba, so you're allowed to eat it till 10 o'clock. Why does he say, Shegozru chachamim? Because the rabbis put up a prohibition, al isra chilas chametz, on prohibition of eating chametz, shosayim, 2 hours, koidim zman isurish min haTorah, before its actual prohibition comes biblically. Because biblically, what time would be prohibited? Biblically, without the rabbi's interference. 12. Okay? So Rabbi Yehuda argues that they didn't put a 1 hour difference, they put a 2 hours. 2 hours. So to eating, it's 2 hours. The toilen kol chamish, so from the beginning of the 5th hour, you leave the chametz in the suspended area. You don't eat it and you don't have to burn it. Since it was given over to since this is why did he say 2 hours versus 1 hour? Since the hours were given to people that are ignorant, they don't know really what's going on. So we have a fear that they can make a mistake by 2 hours. Means 1 hour is not enough. You could mistake 2 hours, meaning that, you know what, the likelihood of us making a mistake between 11 and 12 is very likely. Very likely. It looks like 11, but maybe it's, So therefore, certainly, even Reb Meir would say, certainly 1 hour has to be pushed backwards. Because that's very easy to make a mistake. Rabbi Yehuda says it's also likely to make a mistake by 2 hours. Okay, that's really what the difference is. And it's explained in the Gemara that even though at the beginning of the 5th hour, the sun is in the eastern part of the meridian, and by the 7th hour it traverses the meridian, right? So it's on the western side. I mean, if you took, for example, an imaginary line and just drew it from the center of the plane and just go straight up above, by 12 o'clock the sun should be exactly on top of you. Exactly on top of you, right? But what happens is by 1 o'clock, where is it? It's west. It's west already. So you would think to yourself, okay, so let's think about this. 10 o'clock, where is the sun? Way east, right? It's still moving closer to the meridian. At 1 o'clock, it's already past the meridian. So how could you make this mistake of 2 hours, right? I mean, you don't have to be exactly Galileo.
But our calendar is lunar, we're talking about the sun.
Right.
With the extra month, you can jump around, several weeks, year to year, so that can make a difference.
But that could make, cloudy day, hold on one day, hold on with the cloudy day, because that's a wonderful point. But going back to Mark, you have to understand that hours are solar hours. Hours never, the lunar calendar doesn't come into play when it comes to solar hours. What we're really worried about here
Yeah, we're
is,
talking about where the sun.
correct,
isn't-
where the sun is in a specific point during the day. So if I say like at 9 o'clock in the morning, where would the sun normally be? Halfway between the horizon and halfway between the meridian, right? 9 o'clock would be exactly at a 45-degree angle, right? Exactly. Every day, every single day, except of course, not in, if we're only dealing with a 12-hour day. You're correct in the days where, in the summertime, days are longer, the winter days are shorter. So if it's, let's say, not a 12-hour 6 to 6, but it's, let's say, a 9-hour day from, let's say, 8 to 4 or something like that, then of course it would be different. The noontime would not be 12, it would be something else. Right? I mean, because so you have to figure out like this. So therefore what he's arguing is what they're asking actually is why 2 hours? Because 2 hours you should be able, even without a watch. Let's say if we were stranded on an island, without being Galileo or one of these great astronomers, without a telescope, we should be able to tell when noon is. I mean, it's it's noon. It's a little here, it's 11, a little more, it's 10, it's that kind of a thing. But, he says, most people don't make a mistake in 2 hours. He says, still, the rabbis proclaimed this prohibition because of, Tim, say it again what you said before?
Cloudy days.
A cloudy day. Then all bets are off. Right? It's a cloudy day, all bets are off. So therefore, even on a cloudy day, you may make a mistake between the 5th and the 7th hour. So therefore, they made it 2 hours. They do agree both when they have to start burning the chametz,
6 hours.
the 6th hour, because that hour the rabbis have prohibited even from having any pleasure. See, why burn it? So give it away. No, we talked about last week that it's a double whammy. Last week we talked about a little bit that the rabbis, because of the severity of the chametz prohibition, gave you what was called a double. It's actually like a nimnim nimnois it would be called. It's a double whammy. One, what they did is they took the chametz away from you. You can't have any pleasure. If you kept chametz over Pesach, you decided, I'm not searching for it. I have it. My lemon meringue pie, I'm not giving up.
We're still on that pie, it probably doesn't taste any good.
No, after a whole week, it's probably good, but we're still thinking about it. So
It's frozen.
it's frozen, exactly. So that lemon meringue pie, you're not gonna own it, but you're still gonna be over. You're transgressed on the avera, on the prohibition. So it's a kind of a two-sided sword here. On one hand, you don't own it. The rabbi says you can't have any pleasure from it. On the other hand, oh yes, you will get lashes because you do own it. So not only do you not own it, let's say treif, for example. If you have a treif piece of meat in your house, you don't have to burn it. What do you do with a treif piece of meat? It says like kelev tashlichon, so you give it to your dog.
Oh.
You throw it to your dog, right? You're going to give it to the dog to eat. You could give it, you could give it away as a present, whatever it is. Not so chametz. Chametz you have to burn. You can't have any pleasure from it. And when is the moment that you can't have any more pleasure from the chametz? The beginning of 11 o'clock. As soon as 11 o'clock comes in, you have to get rid of that chametz. Not only get rid of it in the sense of, get rid of it. If you can't burn it, what do? Throw it into the ocean. Okay? That's
But this treif meat, if you had some treif meat, you
Yeah.
would probably have to cook it for your dog, and you can't cook it in your kitchen.
Well, of course,
because-
obviously, then that's a problem. So that's why you have to give it away to somebody. Why, the dog has to eat cooked meat? Has to eat cooked meat, and the dog. What's wrong with raw meat? I know, I never had a dog, so, you know. He says like this, okay. He says, not only that, but he says, Rabbi Yehuda. Also Rabbi Yehuda said, okay? Now, we're talking about, since we're talking about prohibitions of what happens when and they're no good, they become puzzled, they become prohibited. Now he's going to add a few more things. What happens? He says, the shtei chalus shel toida, the 2 loaves of a thanksgiving offering, right?
The next missions, right?
Yes.
Right, that's the next Mishnah. Hey, we're dealing with Mishnah number 5. So he says, if you bring a thanksgiving offering, we're going to read in the parsha, that you have to bring with it 2 loaves of bread. Right, 2 loaves. That's called shtei chalus shel toida. 2 loaves of the thanksgiving offering. Okay? Psulais become prohibited, become unfit. When? Munachos al gabe itztem. What do you do with them? What do you do with them? What? The 2 loaves of a thanksgiving offering that had become unfit were placed. You can't throw them out. Why can't you throw them out? Because they're kosher. They're holy, right? They become holy. So what do? You have to place them upon the roof of the portico. Al gabe itztem. As he explains over here, this was on the Temple Mount, right? And this was kind of a balcony in order for the nation to see as a simon. They looked at it as a sign. So you took the 2 loaves, you put it up there, and that's where they remained on the during the prohibition period. Okay, from and these were what? So he says kolzman shemunachos. So what did they do? All the while that the 2 loaves were on the portico, kolam eichlim. All of everybody knew that you could eat. Still eat what? Matzah? Chametz. Okay, chametz. Right?
So
as long as the 2 loaves were being seen, you could still eat chametz.
But that assumed that you lived right there.
Oh yeah. That was only within seeing distance, obviously. If you lived in Tzfat, no, this wouldn't help you much. But this only worked if you're living around Yerushalayim. So you looked up at the portico, you looked up at the... Don't forget, a lot of people had come to Jerusalem because they had to bring their Pesach sacrifice. Right? You couldn't bring the Pesach sacrifice except where? In Jerusalem. If you lived in Akko or if you lived in Tel Aviv and you were out.
Well, there are no sacrifices anywhere else, right?
Exactly. You had to bring it in Yerushalayim. So therefore, you can imagine the humul tumul of the Temple Mount on the morning of Pesach. Right? Okay? So as long as the two breads were up there, fine, great, no problem. Everybody ate. Nitla achas. Then the kohen went up, took one down, toilet. Okay, suspended. Couldn't eat anymore, but we're not burning yet, right? We're not burning. Okay, one comes down. So whatever you're in the middle of a sandwich and one comes down, you're in big trouble. You're going to drop it from your mouth right away and stop eating. What? Mid-bite. Like I told you, like shatnez. I told you about that shatnez laboratory. When the guy came to speak to us, shatnez is a prohibition of wearing wool and linen. And he told us if you're wearing shatnez and you find that in the middle of the street, you have to take your pants off. You can't walk with your pants. You have to literally take your pants off in the middle of the street. Yeah, that's going to happen, Rabbi. Yeah, that's...
Now, where do the laws of modesty come in here?
The law, no what modesty. No, in shatnez there's no modesty. Right. All right? Loy eichlin v'loy sarfin. So you didn't eat and you didn't burn yet. Okay? Nitlu shtehen. When the kohen went up and took the second one, his chilu kol am sarfin. The entire people began to burn their chametz.
So this was the signal now for the people to...
This was the signal, right.
They didn't really have to know all this thing.
Exactly.
They just had to watch.
They just watched the 2 loaves.
Away.
Exactly. Which is like now in Crown Heights. We don't have it here, although I'm trying to implement it here in Long Beach. But in Crown Heights, I'm just joking. I think what I have to say. In Crown Heights, they have this on one building. There's these huge speakers. Come Shabbos 10 minutes before candle lighting. You hear it all through Crown Heights. This loud blare, this blast. Okay, that tells you that it's 10 minutes before candle lighting. Stop cooking, stop this. Then you hear the blast. That means it's 2 minutes to candle lighting, and then the blast, third blast, is the candle lighting itself. All right? So I'm trying to get it in Long Beach. I want to put it up, for candlelighting here. And you see, so those when you lived in a community where there's a lot of mostly Jews, you can pull this off. Okay, he says like this. Rabbi Gamliel then adds, chulin. Okay, that means chulin. He explains over here. Those are matters that anybody could eat. Chulin is regular bread. Regular bread compared to what? Regular bread compared to the Kohen's bread, which was called truma. Truma was a holy food that not everybody was able to eat. Only the Kohen was allowed to eat. How did they get the truma? From us. That means if we were farmers and we would, take a certain percentage of our earnings, we'd give it to the Kohen, and the Kohen then would use it for himself personally. Only he could use that. No one else could use that. What? Family. Yes. Him and his family could use that. Chulin, okay? Necholin kol arba. Chulin, regular food eaten by the average Joe, could be eaten till, what's kol arba? All 4 hours could be eaten till what time? Till 10. Okay, thank you. Till 10. Okay? So kol arba could be eaten till 10 o'clock. So Rabbi Gamliel would agree with Rabbi Yehuda, right, in the previous Mishnah. Usruma, now he adds something else, but truma, which truma? Remember what I told you? What's truma? Special bread that was given to the priests. Now kol chomish, they're allowed to eat it when? Till 10. 11. Till 11. The servant with chilashesh, and they burn it at the beginning of the 11th hour.
So they all burn it at the same time.
Everybody burns the same time. Eating is different. So he introduces now a new concept. What's his concept that he introduces? That the Kohanim, the priests, had a different schedule than the average Jew. Why would that be? Think about that for a moment. Why? Because in general, by nature, they were more careful. They were more stringent upon themselves. See, an average Jew went where he wanted to, did what he wanted to, ate what he wanted to. The Kohen could not. The Kohen had to be careful to come into contact with any dead body. He couldn't go near a cemetery, couldn't go into a hospital, couldn't go into anything. So by nature, the Kohen always was more conscious of where he was, at what time, what kind of food he was eating. For example, just 1 second. I'm just gonna. We invite ourselves to each other's homes. It's not a problem. We come in, we eat. I ask you where the food comes from, whether the food came from was touched by whom and by where. No, we don't. I don't care. We don't care, because ultimately the average Jew was going to anyways end up going to the mikveh or have to purify himself before the holiday. Because in general, you're going to go to a funeral, you're going to go to a hospital, you're going to do something. The Kohen had to be careful. He couldn't eat anybody's food. Because what if that food came into contact with a dead body? What happens if that food came into contact with a dead...
So no matter how kosher someone was, the Kohen ate by
The Kohen had to be very careful. So they only ate at people's homes that they knew that were very careful. They were called chaverim, a chaver. A chaver was someone that was careful never to defile themselves. Never to defile themselves. So that's why Rabbi Gamliel feels confident that even though that there may be a day a day that's cloudy, and on a cloudy day we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between 10 and 12, right? But the Kohen, he felt why does he have to restrict them with 2 hours? He feels quite confident and that to be able to give them the extra hour to eat. That's all.
Does he add this new twist? Is this the only way that he can change what Rabbi Judah already said?
Right.
He has to do something new. He can't just say no, it's not right. He has to say another way. He has to add something new in the explanation.
He has a right. Rabbi Gamliel has a right to argue with Rabbi Yehuda because they're in the same playing field.
Okay.
They're in the same league. They're both major leaguers. Someone that's a minor league can argue with them. So he has a right. He just introduced this point that just to add. Now we don't know what Rabbi Yehuda would have said to this. See, because we were not privy to what Rabbi Yehuda's thoughts are. We just know that Rabbi Yehuda gave a blanket statement for everybody. Would Rabbi Yehuda agree that the Kohen may eat it till 11 o'clock? It's possible. We don't know. We don't know that.
He didn't respond.
He didn't respond. He didn't respond.
Why?
Or either, if he did respond, when they compiled the Mishnah, they left it out. So then you'd have to go back to the Gemara and find out, was there an argument on this? Did everybody agree to Rebbe Gamaliel's position? See what, I mean, and we've seen the difficulty why I thought of dealing with the Mishnah versus going to the Gemara, because the Gemara we get stuck in, and then we end up doing 2 lines, and for 6 weeks we end up going 6 lines, and by that time we have to live at least 1,011 years to finish the Talmud. So, but if you wanted to know that, then you'd have to go back, because don't forget that when they started to edit it, they did a lot of editing, cutting out pieces, putting in pieces. I mean, sifting through what they felt was pertinent to the various things. And then the Talmud then introduced many of the arguments when they found the worksheets of the authors of the Mishnah. They started to include that into the Talmud itself.
So the editor had a lot of power without ever saying a word.
Oh, absolutely. The editor has all the power.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have cut out.
We don't know.
Maybe there was a guy, a brilliant guy, Rabbi, who he did like, and then everything he said he just dropped. The guy becomes anonymous. No one ever heard of him.
Did Red
So-
Meyer live at the same time as all, they all lived?
Yes,
all
they
contemporaries?
lived primarily, there was several generations we're talking about here. Several generations. But just to give you an idea, like Rabbi Hillel, for example, lived during the Common Era to about 30, 40, 50. That was his period. After him came, maybe 30 or less. Then after him came Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who lived, during the destruction of the temple. Then following him was another generation. Then came Rabbi Akiva. So they all lived one generation after another until the compilation of the Mishnah, which was done by Rabbi Yehuda in about the year 250. So it was about 250 years that you had
So this
several
group
generations.
was the last group.
No, this group probably was still around when the Beis Hamikdash was around. Don't forget, this was done when Rabbi Yehuda talks about the 2 challahs being put on top of the itztaba, on top of the portico. That must have been before 70. Oh, sure, it must have been done before 70. Otherwise, how would he even remember it being done? There was certainly no portico after the destruction, right? I mean, this had to be. So this gives us a little hint of when that took place. Okay,
You said you're so smart, you know all this.
who's that?
You.
Why? No, you have to be.
Look at that.
No, what you have to do is you have to be like a detective. You see, because you learn from the words, you figure out. You try to extrapolate. That's the greatness of the Gemara, because they say they cut one word after. Just from his words, from Rebbe Gamliel's words, you could learn a lot of different things, because it shows you the respect he had to the Kohanim. I mean, the kind of attitude that he had towards the Kohanim to give him that extra hour of time. It wasn't just an extra hour, who cares? The Kohanim were so busy that day trying to set up the Beis Hamikdash and turning over all the chametz in the Beis Hamikdash. They thought about eating an extra hour sandwich. But from there you could tell exactly how they lived their lives. I mean, that's really what he's really trying to express over here. It's not so much whether you can eat the falafel till 11 or throw out the falafel at 10. It's the fact that these people lived a life on a plane higher than we do. We're not careful, walking. They lived a completely different life, and that's what he's trying to impress us with by giving them the extra hour. So if a kohen did need it, he would have that.
So every doctor should study this. I think they do a much better job.
Why do you think so?
Critical thinking.
Critical
Putting
thinking.
pieces together.
Yeah.
It's true. It's really, if nothing else, it teaches you to see the big picture, put the pieces
Right.
together.
Yeah, it is. It's like detective work.
Yeah.
It's literally like detective work. You have to take the Mishnah, try to figure out what they're saying. That's why we've gone through a number of pieces of the Talmud. The kind of arguments in the Talmud that go on and screaming at each other. No, he didn't mean this, he meant that, back and forth. But that's the beauty of the study of the Talmud, is to sharpen our minds, regardless of what the halach is, regardless of what the outcome
That's
of the
right,
of
regardless
the
of what actually is the
outcome
outcome
of
of this
this.
talking.
No,
It's the idea of just set
Exactly,
yourself
exactly.
to a point where these arguments start to help you analyze
Exactly.
a lot of things.
Exactly,
Very good.
exactly.
All
Right? So he says like this, okay, the next Mishnah is going to be a little bit, we're going to need a little bit of an explanation here, okay? Okay, this is going to be dealing now, because the Mishnah goes off again on tangents. It doesn't always stick to Pesach, okay? And now that Nah, and why should we skip it? I mean, it's part of the Mishnah. Let's stick to it. Okay? He says like this. This Mishnah is going to deal now with the burning of holy meat. When I say holy meat, I'm talking about, we brought a korban. Let's say the shul, we're very happy. We got a building, so we're going to show our appreciation. We're going to bring a sacrifice to the temple. Okay? We bring a sacrifice to the temple, and we bring a bullock.
Is it a tuna?
Yeah, tuma. We bring a bullock. Okay? What happens now? So it becomes defiled. What happens now if the meat becomes defiled? For somehow it comes into contact or whatever it is. After we brought it as a sacrifice, we have to burn it. We've got to burn it. So this Mishnah deals in that kind of burning. Since we're talking about burning chametz, we're going to be dealing now with burning other kinds of material. He says like this. What's defilement? Okay? We say we don't even deal with this kind of concept anymore because we're all defiled. I mean, anybody here not go into a hospital? Anybody not be at a funeral? Of course, we all were. Okay? But in those days, you had to be very careful because it was a strict prohibition about coming on the Temple Mount if you were not completely pure. Now, how would someone know? It was left up to you, right? No, how would anybody know that I came into contact with a dead body? No one would know that. You had. This was something that was given over to you. Okay, so he says like this. This Mishnah deals with burning of holy meat that became defiled with a lesser kind of a defilement together with meat that became defiled with a more stringent type of defilement.
Of course.
Okay, so exactly. She says, what are you talking about here? She says like this. If a corpse is called the father, it says that, the father of all defilements. The father of all defilements. Why the father of all defilements? Because it gives out defilement. You touch a corpse, you're defiled. I touch Tim, he's defiled. Tim touches Mark, he's defiled. So that defilement spreads like a disease. So that's what's called a tuma chamura, a very, very strict and stringent defilement. Right? Now, someone touches that, they're called a via voice. Someone then touches that, they become a first. Someone touches them is a second. Another person touches them is a third. Okay? So it depends how far down the line you go from the actual. Think of it in this way. There's a nuclear blast. So when at ground zero, you're in big trouble. 10 miles away, you're in pretty big trouble. 20 miles away, you're in less trouble. 30 miles away, you're in less trouble. 40 miles away, you're in less trouble. So think of it that way. The corpse is ground zero. And the further you get away, the lesser the tumah becomes. So by the time the fourth person is touched, they may not defile somebody after them. They may be the end of the line. Okay? So someone that touches the corpse, pretty bad. He's standing almost on ground zero. Touched him, he's already 10 miles away and around the table. Okay? So what happens now? So let's say I'm the one that hit the ground zero and I touched the meat of kosher. I touched the holy steak. That holy meat is considered what? Defiled. It's defiled. You can't bring it as a sacrifice anymore
it's
because
not like treif.
It's not treif.
Yeah.
It's called tameh. It has to be burned. No one could use it. But what happens now that Charlotte is number 4 and she now touches the meat? Okay? What happens? It still becomes defiled, but it's 2 levels of defilement. The meat that I touched, very serious. The meat that Charlotte touched, a little less because she herself was a very slight level of defilement. Now, can we think about this for a moment? Can we take Charlotte's steak and put it together with my steak? Touch my steak? We have to worry about why? Because hers is defiled, but a slight case of maybe a slight case of the sniffles. Me, pneumonia. Okay, so we're worried that if your 2 steaks touch, my steak is going to give Charlotte's steak pneumonia, right? As even in the burning process, you can't add defilement levels. So the Mishnah says. So is everybody clear about this idea?
So you have to burn separately.
Okay, you have to burn separately. So theoretically, you would have to burn it separately. So what did he say? Reb Chanina, Reb Chanina, who himself was the chief of the priests, once said, from the days of that I was around, they did not refrain from burning the meat that became defiled with a subsidiary of the defilement, which would be Charlotte. She would be a vlada tumah. Ima basar with the meat. Shenitmam that can be defiled ba'ava tumah. With someone that was the father of defilement. That would be me. Okay? They didn't refrain from it. Since it's going to get burned, burn it. What about adding extra defilement? Who cares about that? The end result is anyways it's going to be
How did
gone.
I get to touch the meat because I'm a woman?
What do you mean? You came to? What do you mean? You were hanging around. I don't know why.
I thought I
Just-
wasn't allowed to.
But
hang around
you
that.
came over there. You came over there. Yeah, it's all right. It's okay. Haisi Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva said, and he added. Now Rabbi Akiva probably did not live in the same time as Rabbi Hanina, right? Because Rabbi Hanina was still during the chief of the priests. What do you mean? Or the adjunct high priest, prefect of the priests. He probably still lived at a time when the base of Mikdash probably was still around. Rabbi Hanina's kind of right? Rabbi Akiva we know lived in the times of Bar Kokhba, which was a much later. So here you have in one Mishnah people that did not live in the same time period. Maybe never even saw each other.
About the same issue.
Right? But they're dealing with the same issue. So Haishav and Akiva, he said, from the days of the Kohanim, nimnu, they did not refrain milahadlik es Hashemen, from lighting the oil shenifsal b'tful yoin, that became defiled. Now what tful yoin means, that this is the lowest level of defilement. It means you went through the entire process, meaning you waited the 7 days and you went to the mikveh. No, you didn't go to the mikveh. Everything you did, the only thing you were missing was going to the mikveh. Tful yoin. Tful means immersion of that day. Because what happens? Let's say I touched a corpse. What would be my process of rehabilitation? I'd have to go to the Kohen. He'd have to take the red heifer, sprinkle some of the red heifer ashes on my head. On the 3rd and 7th day, I would have to go to the mikveh, wash my entire body. So here I am the 7th day. I've done everything. I'm about to re-enter the community, except I'm missing one little process. That's going to the last dipping. So I'm called a tful yoin. Okay? A tful yoin. While it's still day. And at the moment the sun sets, all I'm waiting for is for the sunset to go down. I mean, I've done everything already, and I'm ready, just waiting for the sunset to go down, which is I'm 99% of the way there, right? I'm 99% of the way there. Okay? So I went to the mikveh that day, and I'm just waiting now for the sun to set. I touched the oil that went to the base of Mikdash. Okay? I touched the oil that had to be burnt in the base of Mikdash. Or Truma. I touched oil that belonged to the Kohen. Right, okay? Then there's a guy. Okay, so I played the part of
It's a teeny weeny bit polluted.
I'm a little bit polluted. Now look at Tim, who's an avatuma, who touched a corpse, okay? And he touches it, right? And he touches oil too that belongs to Tumah, right? So Rabbi Akiva said, from the days that he remembers, they didn't refrain from adding these two oils together.
Okay.
Even though that Tim's defilement is much tougher than my defilement, but since it's defilement is defilement, it is. So he answers over here. Even though Shemaisifin we add Tumah, defilement on top of defilement. One defilement on top of defilement, we don't care. We don't care. Okay?
It relates maybe like the speed of light. You can't get more polluted than an olive.
Yeah, it could get more polluted, but we just it doesn't bother us. Since it's anyways being burnt out, so who cares?
Okay.
Who cares? Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Meir, sorry. I got Amar Rabbi Meir, this is Mishnah number Zayin. Now he says, Midivrayim Lamadu, from their words we learned, from the words of Rabbi Hanina, and the words of Rabbi Akiva, Shesarfin, we burn, Truma Tahira. Truma Tahira would mean, Im Tmeya B'Pesach. Let's say you have, the Kohen has a sandwich, or a lemon meringue pie, and he wants to burn it, and it's not even defiled. It's still kosher v'yosher. And he has some truma that is defiled, and he wants to burn it. What would be the rule? Can we burn it together? Yeah, why not, right? Even though that the non-defiled will touch the defiled and he'll add defilement. So what Rabbi Meir is doing is taking one step further even, right? Because the previous Mishnah, if we remember, we studied, you're allowed to do that because both of them were defiled. Even though one was a slight, very, very slight case of defilement, here Reb Meir is taking it one step further. Even though the truma or the cake of the Kohen is not defiled at all, and the moment you put it into the waste basket to burn it, it becomes defiled, which is a prohibition. You're not allowed to defile truma. Truma is holy. Doesn't matter. Since they're both going to be burned, it's okay. He says it's okay. But Pesach, okay? On Pesach, since
That's
why?
only for Pesach.
Only for Pesach, because normally you can't put the two things together because one becomes defiled. You're not allowed to do
Normally
that.
You're not gonna burn it.
But yeah, normally you're not allowed to burn it,
But
right?
you said Reb Meir
Yeah.
lived during the
Time of Rabbi Akiva. He lived in the time of Rabbi Akiva.
He lived at the time.
Yeah, he
of
lived
Rabbi-
in the time of Rabbi Akiva. Because he says that, right?
Yes. I
Then you
know,
guys,
so
you
it's-
see from the first two words, you know when he lived, right? Leman is Sofer Truma Tzmin Torah, Yachim Truma Pesach Be'er Pesach. Afal Fish Truma Chom Tzayrein Erezer Michel Sofer. She said them to be Sofer and Mikol Makom Mutter Sofer. Okay, so it goes into technicalities. Okay, okay. As soon as he says that, and Rabbi Yossi in this other yeshiva hears what he says, he says, "I just forget about him." He says, "Amar Loi Rabbi Yossi." Rabbi Yossi says to Reb Meir, "Eina hi mina mina." It doesn't mean it's not the same. How can you make a hackish?
He's saying it doesn't follow the rules.
It doesn't follow.
Of Talmudic discourse.
But-
There's no logic here.
He says it's not logical. He's arguing with Reb Meir that what your statement is not completely not logical. It absolutely, you cannot compare the two. And let me read what the commentator says. He says it's not, you can't compare your statement to the statements of Rechanin. Why? Because they permitted defilement, even though it was a lesser defilement with a stronger defilement, but it was all defiled. So what's the difference? So you're not really adding one defilement on another defilement. Okay? From that you can't learn that you're allowed to actually burn undefiled cake with defiled cake. Right? Because even though and what so that means so he's saying it's not logical what you're saying. Because you are actually defiling something. They're not defiling anything, even though that the end result is the same. It all gets burnt. And the mayor says, "What's the difference? Put it in the waste basket together. What's the difference? It's all going to get burnt." No, you can't, because the moment it touches, what you've done is you've defiled. So that's why this is the argument. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. And Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, two heavyweights, agreed. Agreed with who? Was it Rabbi Meir or was it with Rabbi Yossi? No? I think it's Rabbi Yossi, because the next words are, Shesarfen Zula Atzma V'Zula Atzma. They burned one separately. They agreed with the stricter one, with Rabbi Yossi. And you can't burn it together, right? You have to burn one separately, and one separately you can't put together in one basket clean and defiled truma. You just can't. Aman nechlaku, and what are they arguing? And who's arguing? Who's
This is
arguing?
Reb Meir that
And-
had that wonderful wife that was.
Reb Meir was brilliant. His wife was brilliant, brilliant as he was. Then what? And then about what do they dispute? So who's disputing here? And what are they disputing?
Eliezer and Joshua are disputing
Okay.
Yossi.
They're disputing Yossi, you're saying, right? And what are they disputing here? Al Kluya, on something, on Truma that became defiled, but only doubtfully. Okay, hold on. A Truma means holy bread that doubtfully became defiled. We don't know. An uncertainty came into place here. Could it be defiled? Could it not be defiled? We don't know. There's a guy walked by, touched it. Maybe that guy was defiled and touched it. So we don't know.
Worst case, we take a worst case.
So now this is where they argue on. Because this is suspended now. This truma is like somewhere in suspended from the ceiling. Why? Because we don't know. If it's defiled, right?
Yeah.
Then it could be burnt with the defiled. If it's clean, can it be burnt with the defiled?
No.
No, because Rabbi Yossi said lie. So what do you do with it? So he says like this: Rabbi Lezer to sort of Zulasma. Rabbi Lezer burned each one separately. Even in the case of uncertainty, he would not mix the two together. He kept it separate. For Rabbi Yeshua, Eimer Shtein Ka'achas. He says in this kind of a case, since there was a possibility of defilement, burn them together. Okay? So how many different opinions do we have over here? Let's think. Let's go back to the top of the Mishnah. Okay? Top of the previous Mishnah, number 6. We have Rav Chanina Shkana Koyin, right? We started with the Koyin. The Koyin said that in his days they never defied, they never stopped, they never prohibited, they never refrained from burning defiled meat with defiled meat. Doesn't matter what level of defilement, right? So he's opinion number 1. He could care less. Defiled meat goes. Came along Rabbi Akiva and said, okay, you know what? In that case, so I know for a fact that in the case of oil, even in oil, the defilement, even if one came with a full yoin, even if one was just waiting for the sun to settle, and that would make him kosher v'yosher, and he touched the oil from someone that actually came off, he put his hand on a corpse and held on to this coffee, which is like, ay, caramba, this is like ground zero, doesn't make a difference. Burn the oil together. Okay? Came
That's
along.
more or less a footnote, isn't it, to the...
That's just an extension.
Yeah,
He's extending
in
it.
another area.
Yeah, another area, but they agree. They both agree. They both agree that it doesn't matter. You're not adding toma to toma. You're not adding defilement to defilement. Fine. Came along Rabbi, who was a brilliant scholar, and listened to their words, and then said, if that's the case, that in the case of a lesser defilement and a major defilement, you put them both together, even though you could now the other defilement is going to go sky high. Let's extend it even to Pesach. So Pesach, he felt that if you take defiled chametz and undefiled chametz, put it together in the basket and burn it. Who cares? So he logically wanted to extend it even to chametz and when it's not defiled. No? Came along Rabbi Yossi and said, Zoisloi. No, it doesn't make any sense. You can't learn it that way. You have to say that they have to be burned separately. Because in that case, you actually are adding defilement. Now, he gives a lengthy footnote to say it's harsher here because the chametz is not really prohibited from the Torah's point of view, right? At the hour when we're burning it, we still have an hour while it's still from the Torah's point of view, it's still permitted, right? Did I lose you there? Right? You understand what I'm saying, right? Because till noon, so when we take this bread and we burn it at 11 o'clock, from biblically, it's still permitted. Only the rabbis prohibit it. But then you take something that's defiled, put it together. What have you done now? Biblically, you've made this tummy. Even though rabbinically you could burn it, but biblically you've added to the defilement. That's why he's so strict, Rabbi Yossi, and says you can't do that. Did you follow that logic?
Yeah.
You followed that logic, right? Because it's still an hour to go when the Torah says you could still eat it. The rabbis put the prohibition, but then the Torah comes along and says you can't defile. So he says no, you have to burn them separately. Came along two geniuses, two great illustrious guys, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and they agreed with Rabbi Yossi to outweigh Rabbi Meir. So you have to burn it separately, but then the Mishnah throws in a curveball. So where do they argue? Why do we mention them here? They argue in the case of an uncertain defilement, a doubtful defilement. So doubtful defilement, Rabbi Lezer says, still, he's not giving an inch, separate. And Rabbi Yeshua says, don't worry about it. You could still burn it. You could still burn it because
Like
it's...
the chicken, is it kosher?
Breaking
Is it
up
kosher?
kosher.
Depends
What?
what page you look on.
It depends who you ask. Depends what kind of city. I'm only living in a city where the rabbis are from Beis Hillel. I move into I say, who's the rabbi from? Which school of thought? Beis Shammai, I'm moving to Seal Beach. If it's Seal Beach, it's Beis Shammai, I'm moving to Long Beach. I gotta live in a city where they're lenient. But Beis Hillel is too. Thank you very much, Tim. Beis Hillel is too tough. Too
So
tough.
they created jobs for themselves and they...
Well, you needed, you have to understand, you needed the Sanhedrin. Because you can imagine, you see, I just...
Women didn't create jobs. Jobs were created.
Created.
And they
Now,
had
these
men
jobs,
created jobs.
These jobs were created, but necessary. They were very necessary. Because don't forget that a lot of Judaism is built upon these rabbinical prohibitions. I mean, and certainly around this time, this era, when it was mayhem. I mean, imagine living in a time when the base of English is gone, the Sanhedrin is scattered, everybody doesn't know what's going on. I mean, in the war of 66, 70, they probably lost 600,000-700,000 Jews were massacred in Israel. And then another few 100,000 were massacred during the Bar Kokhba. So the whole Judaism was in the communication, and you don't know it exactly. And you have to still keep the rules. Because the rabbi said that it doesn't become suspended. Judaism is not going to fall apart. We're going to keep the rules even more stringent than we did even before when the basic movement said, you needed these guys. You needed these. Every time I say these words, guys, I think of the rabbi hitting me in the head with them. These guys? Rabbi Kiva to you is a guy? A guy?
He is a guy.
No, he's a Rabbi Kiva. He's not a guy. I would say that, he would ask questions. We have a big Talmud tomb, and the guys in the back of the book. Guys in the back of the book! True! A smack in the head. And that's how you refer to the guys. That Moses is a guy to you. Oh, our teachers. Yeah, they were trained. They're nice, soft. Very, very, okay. Okay.
They didn't hear you.
Yeah, they're good. They meant well. Even though they didn't know how to get their points across. Thank you, Tim. They did good. They did good. Perik Sheni. Okay, we finished one Perik. So now if you go home and your neighbor asks you, I have defiled oil and non-defiled oil. Well, can I burn it together? Your answer is?
Depends on the rabbi.
Oh, exactly. No. I'll tell you, that's his old one. I don't know, it said the name of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. It's hard to believe that he would say something, but there's a statement in the Gemara, Ayepater Adam Mechaveri Elami Toich Dvar Alocha. Ayepater Adam Mechaveri. One should not leave his friend Elami Toich Dvar Alocha, except from words of Torah. Because if two people are saying goodbye to each other, the last thing that they should say is not dealing with politics or with the worldly affairs, but one should say a Dvar Torah, and then they should leave. So the last thing that they will remember talking to each other is Dvar. So Rabbi Moshe threw a quirk into the statement, and he said, if Ein Potter is Adam Mechaver, if you want to get rid of your friend, start saying words of Torah. As long as you're talking politics, he'll stick around. But the moment you say, let's learn Torah, oh, you know what, I have an appointment, I have to go. That's you want to get rid of your friend, start speaking words of Torah. He says like this. The Mishnah in Perik Bay starts like this. Kol shah, all the while, shemuter lachel, that is permitted for us to eat. So till what time are we permitted to eat? Till it depends who, right? It depends who. But let's say till 11 o'clock. Okay? Let's say till 10 o'clock. Okay? Till 10 o'clock. Ma'achel behema, one is permitted to feed his cattle, l'chaya, his animals, l'oifis, and his birds. U'machrei l'nachri, and he's permitted to sell it to a Gentile. U'muter ba'anasai, and he's permitted to have any kind of pleasure he could have from that food, whether it's smelling it or looking at it or whatever it was, he could have. Overs manai, okay. Once it's past the time, that means now you can't do it anymore. That means it came along and that was the moment you had to burn it and you didn't burn it. Asr ba'anasai, it's prohibited from having any pleasure of this whatsoever. And even though he says that from the Torah's point of view, the chametz is not prohibited except from afternoon, right? The rabbis established a prohibition from the beginning of the 6th hour in order to push away a man from transgressing a biblical prohibition. Okay? Fine. And then he adds, not only are you not allowed to have any anah, one is not permitted to use it for fire with an oven or a double stove. Meaning, if you have like a wheat or whatever it was, or any kind of chametz, you can't throw it in there. Even though you think to yourself, hey, 1 second, what am I doing? I'm burning it. Right? I'm burning it. So why not? I'm burning it. Why shouldn't I be able to throw it? I'm burning. You want me to burn it? I'm burning it. No. Sorry. Before 11, you want to throw it into your stove? Can you?
Sure.
Yes. Before 11, sure, because it's not a problem. You can have as much pleasure as you want from it. The moment it crosses 11:10, that magical moment, you can't have any pleasure from it. Even though you'll argue, but I'm burning it. You want me to burn it? I'm burning it. So what? So it happens to be in my oven. No, because what happens then?
You're enjoying the burn.
You're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Because you're cooking from it, and whatever else is going on in there, you can't do that. Even though that it's, okay.
So one thing I was saying, when you start to talk about this period of time in history and the background of this period, actually, the more you know about that, the more you really have an understanding of what's going on in here.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand.
Well,
the
it
period
helps.
of time.
It helps a little bit. It does help. Even though I'll tell you, in yeshiva, they spent very little time on the historical background of this. It wasn't this. Who cares about who lived when lived who? As long as you just understood what they were saying. It doesn't make a difference.
And shut up.
But don't ask any questions. And certainly they didn't want to start getting into the wars with the Romans. First of all, they themselves didn't know much about the given except what was given from the Talmud. If you learn in the Talmud, but if you said, should we be reading Josephus on this? Because Josephus gives you a whole world of what it was like in those days. Yeah, read Josephus. Yeah, smack in the head, Josephus, Memphis. All of those guys, forget about it.
But,
this
from
is the
my
way,
perspective now, I think that the more I'm able to understand the period and the geography and everything, the more this fits in.
Sure, absolutely. And I think this is true about any period in history. The times are definitely going to dictate to what's going on. Let's be honest, all right? There were various rabbis that codified the law in various geographical areas in the world. Right? Rambam lived where? Among whom?
Spain and North Africa.
Among whom did he live? Muslims.
Yeah.
Predominantly, he lived, met, ate, not necessarily ate, but he interacted with Muslims, non-Christians. Rabbi Ishalish, who was a great codifier, lived in the town of Krakow in Poland. Who do you think he hung out with? Polish Catholics, right? Polish Catholics. Now, I'm not saying he hung out with them, but his interaction, what he knew, his world was Catholicism. Did he ever see a Muslim? Probably never in his life. If he grew up in Krakow, and he stayed in Krakow, and he lived in Krakow, and he wrote in Krakow, probably never. So don't think for a minute, I don't think this is heretical by saying this, that those geographical areas influenced them.
Just like climate here influences you versus the Northeast.
It has to. If you're an American rabbi growing up here in the United States of America, you're influenced by American society, and you think like an American, you speak English like an American, American ideals start to pop into your head, right? So that's the way it goes. So the Rambam, his worldview, even though we say, of course, the Rambam and Rabbi Ishlish and American rabbis are all focused on the Torah, but it's hard, extremely difficult not to be able to be influenced by outside sources. Certainly, someone like the Rambam
would be.
Even take the rabbis living at this time. Among the rabbis living at this time, there were some that were politically right wingers. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, we have many times in the Mishnah, was a very strong anti-Roman, very very much wanted to get rid of the Romans, throw the Romans out. Rabbi Akiva was much more of an appeaser. Hey, they're here. There's no reason to rile them up, to go to war against them. So that itself would lend to how you looked at the world, and how you looked at the world was the same way you looked at halacha. Some easygoing guys make it easier. Beis Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, his line of thought, and others, Beis Shammai and their line of thought. That's the way it works. There's no going around that. So certainly, go ahead.
I do have the feeling that these people have had quite enough history. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's no real interest.
They're done with it. They're done with it because they felt that to them it was a waste of time. It was a waste of time studying. What are you going to learn from history? What are you going to learn from history? What are you going to talk about the destruction? They know, they saw, they smelled it, they lived it. It was every day of their lives was there. They said there's no point. To them, the world of the Torah was an escape.
But it was
because you can't.
influenced
Yeah, it was
by the
influenced,
world.
but you can't. The outside world can never get to us this way, right? If you lock the door and all we do is talk about defilement and impurity, so who cares about Hillary and Barack and this and that? No one cares. Who cares about them, right? Who cares about them? I think I once told a story that was in Yerushalayim, especially. There used to be people that lived in Jerusalem that were literally out of the world people. Literally out of the world people. When I say out of the world people, I mean they had no clue what was going on in the outside world. Their entire existence was surrounded in a 2-block area. They woke up in the morning, they went to the mikveh every day, they went to shul, they davened, learned, went home and eat, went back to shul to learn. That was it. That was their entire existence, was a 2-block radius in Jerusalem. Never left Jerusalem, had no will to go around Jerusalem, couldn't care what was going on in the world, didn't care about anything. There was one fellow that was especially well-known, Parish. He was so devoid of anything going on in the world. He came to shul, sat in the corner, prayed and studied all day, never read a newspaper, never watched television, doesn't know what internet is. And his name was, let's say, Meir. Let's call him Meir. Okay, Meir for honor of Meir. So one day this Meir, a group of young guys are standing in shul and talking, and he goes over to them and said, "Tell me, excuse me, last night there was American elections. Who was the president? Who was elected president?" So the guy says, Ronald Reagan. Okay, fine. Goes back into the corner. 2 seconds later, he comes back. He says, "What was the name of the guy?" He says, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan? Okay, Ronald Reagan. He goes back into the corner, puts his tallis over his head, takes about 2 hours of davening in the morning. After the 2 hours, he takes off his tallis, is rolling up his tefillin. One of the young gentlemen comes over to Rabbi and says, "Rabbi, you got to explain this to us. Why did you come before davening? Interesting who the American president was that was recently elected. What do you care? You never care about any of these things." He says, "Let me tell you something. Today in davening, when we say the blessings, the last blessing we say is thank God that God did not, one of the lessons is thank God, God did not make me a Gentile. So lo yasani God, didn't make me a Gentile, right? It says in the morning blessings. Baruch Hashem, God did not make me a Gentile. I came to the blessing and I began to think, what?
Or a woman.
Oh, don't mention that, please. Don't mention that. We're going to get into trouble over here. Gentile, yeah. It's hard enough with the Gentiles. Forget about the women. Okay? Forget about it. Okay? So the mayor says, I started to pray this morning, and I came to this blessing, and I thought to myself, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. I want to thank you, O Lord, for not making me a Gentile. So I thought, which kind of a Gentile am I referring to over here? Am I referring to Ahmed, the poor Arab that schleps the water? Even he doesn't want to be a Gentile. So I thought of who's the most powerful Gentile. So I thought yesterday was the elections. I said Ronald Reagan. I said, I don't even want to be Ronald Reagan. Thank God for not making me this kind of a Gentile like Ronald Reagan. All right. So this was Rameir standing in the corner of the shul, just to give you an example of how so out of worldly these people were. So out of world how these people were, and why? Why did this happen? This is I believe a direct correlation of how the world treated us. That's all. How the world treated us with disrespect, in the best circumstance. With anger and hatred, the worst, killing and everything. So how did we escape?
Turning inward.
That was it. You went into the shtetl and you went into yeshiva and you said, forget about everything else. They once asked the Rebbe, his teacher was the Rogachover, the Rabbi Yosef Rosen. He lived in a town called Dvinsk. Brilliant guy. A genius's genius. So they once asked the Rebbe, who himself was not such a piker, he himself was a genius in his own right. They said to him, would you say that the Rogachover was as smart as Einstein? And the Rebbe's answer was, only the Rogachover. Meaning, you think if the Rogachover had not gone into science and other great rabbis in Eastern Europe that who were leading great yeshivas, they wouldn't be as smart as Einstein. But their world was limited to this. That's all they cared about. That's all they cared about. What the Talmud says, what the Gemara says. They wrote books, they wrote commentary, and this was their life. And there was nothing to them outside of this world. And that's why we have on the Rambam, just on the Rambam, the Rambam's code of codification called the Yad HaChazaka, there's at least 10,000 commentaries, books. Who, where, what? But over the years, 800 years, produced 10,000 different commentaries on the Rambam's. My uncle, for example, I have an uncle, my mother's brother. He's closing in on 90 years old. Still publishes books today. Still a publisher of books. Now these books will never be read by more than 6 people. Me, his 2 sons, 2 friends in his shul. But every time he publishes a new book, and it's all about the Torah, and all about these arcane questions and issues that, believe me, the United Nations will never take up. You know, like Shnayim Shasu Pturin. You're not going to do work on Shabbos, but if 2 guys do the work, they're exempt from punishment. You're not allowed to, because he wrote a whole book just on that thought. Shnayim says, okay, who cares? Nobody. But that's his life. He wakes up in the morning and he does research and he goes here and he gets his sons to typeset it and he goes publishes it. Then he runs around Borough Park with a bag full of svarim and distributes it to his friends. This is his life. His whole life. He could care less. Osama, Babuma, Babimba, Babim, who doesn't care? This is his entire existence. This keeps him alive. Yes, that's it. He just wrote a commentary on Haggadah that he gave me, and he wrote a commentary on other things. That's his whole life. His whole life. I said, well, CNN? Who cares? CNN, Fox, means nothing to him. It's absolutely nothing to him. And so take my uncle and use him as an example, and then manifest that 100,000 times. This is what you had in Europe. You had these people that lived in small shtetl, big cities, little cities, especially in especially in Lithuania, where there were tremendous amount of scholarship. This was their whole life. Nothing. The Soloveitchiks, Rabbi Soloveitchiks from the Yeshiva University, his family for generations were just brilliant scholars. Brilliant scholars.
There's a really hatred of us. Draws us together and brings
Unfortunately, they didn't see themselves being big politicians running for office in Lithuania, running for minister of education. It just wasn't their thing. So they went inside and they used all of their. And thank God that we never accepted this idea of what's it called? The Catholic man. The word escapes me. What do the Catholics preach to? Celibacy. Thank you. Oh, yeah. We never accepted this idea of celibacy. So if you had someone as brilliant as the Rambam, you kept his gene pool going through his sons, through his grandchildren. The Soloveitchiks, thank God. I mean, if the first Soloveitchik would have had to take in celibacy, you know what he would have deprived the world of? Generations of these brilliant people. So thank God we never did that.
Dr. Tanya wouldn't have been.
Oh no, she would never have been around, Dr. Tanya Soloveitchik. Exactly. Okay. Don't already quote it. Okay, we'll go here. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein bir chametz el sreifa." The only way you could get out of it is to burn it. You can't do anything else. You can't put it away. You can't throw it in the garbage. You have to burn it. And that's we do. The Chachamim say. The rabbis argue with him. It says, "Af mefor v'zoyer l'ruach." One may scatter it to the wind, or put it into the sea, because he argues that you have to get rid of it. That means what does fire do? It literally ceases its existence. Spreading it in the wind only takes it out of your domain, but it ends up somewhere else. Yeah. So you don't actually get rid of it. But the rabbis didn't interpret it as strictly as he interpreted it. They gave it a little bit leeway, and you could dump it. Okay?
So he didn't burn it at the right time. You could still scatter it.
Yeah, but you have to scatter it at the right time.
Oh, at the right time.
At the right time. You have to scatter it at the right time. If you don't scatter it at the right time, you're in big trouble. Okay. What? That's it. Chametz shel machri, if you had in your possession leaven that belonged to a Gentile, she'avar alav Pesach, that went over Pesach, that you did nothing, mutter b'no, you're allowed to have pleasure from it. Right? V'shal Yisrael, and if it belonged to a Jew, that Pesach passed over it, Asur b'no, you're prohibited from having any pleasure. Mishum, why? Shenemar, because it says, V'lo yeirah l'chos oyer, you shall not see any leavened. And since you transgress that, and you did see leaven, you kept leaven in your house, the rabbis punished you and said, no, you're not allowed to have anything, any pleasure from this whatsoever. So if you have a Gentile neighbor that placed some stuff of his in your freezer, even though that you did not sell that, because you can't sell it, after Pesach you're still permitted to have pleasure with it.
Oh, really?
Back to because
lemon meringue pie that he puts in the,
his lemon meringue pie.
but you can eat it if it's kosher.
Only if it's kosher. If it's not kosher, forget about it. Forget about it. Okay?
So that seems strange.
Yeah. Because it's not yours. Right? It's not yours. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to him. It just happens to be in your house. So it's not yours. And now, I'm not saying, and the Mishnah is not saying that you may have it on your table. Just because it's a Gentile bread, you should have on your Pesach table with your matzah. Obviously not.
No,
you have to put it away.
After.
But you can have, that's not a problem. It's not yours. It's not yours. Okay? He
But
says,
if you were storing something for another Jew,
no, then you have to get rid of it.
can't have
They
it.
can have it. You can have it. Okay? Okay. Ivan Gilulin, a Gentile or a non-Jew, Shehilvas Yisrael, that lent a Jew al chemtsoi, against his leaven, right? Meaning, what happened here? Okay? Gentile A lent money to a Jew, right? Lent a Jew against his leaven. Means he lent money to the Jew, and what happened was that the mashkin, meaning the collateral, was the Jew's chametz. Is that correct? Was the Jew's chametz. Okay? Achar Pesach, if Pesach passed, mutter bano, one may have pleasure from it. Now we're reading this correctly. Let's do this again. Now we see it's late at night. It's very, very difficult keeping. Okay, we're going to lose it over here. Okay? Nachri shehilves Yisrael, a Gentile that lent money to the Jew, right?
That's the first odd thing.
Okay? Yeah, well, what's going on over here? Al chemtsoi, shehiniach ha-Yisraelis chemtsoi. So the Jew gave the Gentile his chametz as a collateral, and he said to him, if I don't, this is the key, there's the key word. If I don't pay you till a certain day, the chametz is yours from today, retroactively. There is the key word. Okay? So the Jew said to the Gentile, okay? So, Meir said to Vladimir, let's just say, okay? Meir said to Vlad, he said, give me the money, here's my chametz. Now if I don't pay you back until a certain date, you own the chametz from today. Meaning that when Pesach passed over, whose chametz was it? The Gentiles.
Right.
Right? Because he didn't pay back, so it's the Gentiles' chametz. Okay? Achra Pesach, mutter bano, after Pesach, it's permitted to have pleasure to the Jew. If the time of paying came and he did not pay him, because the chametz became the Gentiles from the moment the Jew gave it up as collateral. And chametz of a Gentile that passes over Passover is permitted to have pleasure, even eating it, as we explained in our previous Mishnah. Okay? That's the commentary. Now what happens? That exactly the opposite. But if a Jew lends money to a Gentile, okay, and the Gentile sets up his chametz as collateral, and he says to the Jew the same thing, that if I don't pay you back until a certain time, you own the chametz from now, and chametz and Passover pad. What happens? Asur b'no. Right?
Because he didn't get rid of the Pesach.
Of course! He should have gotten rid of the leaven, because it's his leaven from before Pesach. Asur b'no. It's prohibited from having any pleasure. Chametz. What happens if there was an earthquake? Now it's getting into California here. Okay, now we're starting to deal with California. So he says, what Mishnah are we at? Mishnah 3? Okay. Chapter 2, Mishnah 3. He says, Chametz enough of Mapilus, a leaven upon which a rune had collapsed, Harehu kebavur. It's gone. So because some of these Jews are going to be, we're so worried they're going to start undoing the rubble, trying to find the chametz. The rabbi said, please do me a favor. Go home and eat your matzah. Okay? Rabbi Gamliel says, Kol she'eina kelev yochel lachafish achalav. All such a dog cannot reach out. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a 25-story building full. Even if the dog cannot get to it, it's as if it was already done. It's gone already. So I guess he's a leniency, right?
Yeah.
He would be a leniency on the previous statement, right? Is it Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? It's interesting. What do you have? Who makes the statement in the Mishnah? Rabbi Gamliel, and you have to start searching. But if the rubble is about this high, you don't have to search for it anymore. But if it's close to the ground, that's the thing. All right, I think we have enough to think about tonight, right?
We had chametz sniffing dogs.
Oh, yeah, of course. They were looking.
I'm sorry, with all this fuss about whether it's 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
They just declared a fast until the Seder. They wouldn't have had all this argument.
Oh wait, we haven't got to the Mishnah yet. No. They declare not a fast, but as it gets closer to the Seder, they tell you to stop eating. Like for example, in chapter 10, if we ever get to it in this lifetime, says
Yeah,
the
well,
first-
I'm eating this kefir yogurt, the Caucasus, where they live to be 100 because
Yeah.
I'm busy doing this.
That's exactly it. You know what it is. He says, Erev Psachim, just to touch base with what Mark said, on Erev Pesach, Samuch LaMincha, just as it's getting close to Mincha time, when you have to, like that would be like 9.5 hours. Okay, so we're talking about 3:30 now. In 9.5 hours, be 3:30. Adam, a person should not eat acheteshach until it gets dark. So from 3:30 in the afternoon until the Seder, you're not supposed to eat
Anything or just?
anything.
No fruit?
Anything.
No
Anything. Ian says, even if you're a poor person, you should not eat Yosef until you sit down to the Seder. Why?
And the Seder goes on so long you don't eat.
When are we eating? When do we eat?
1:30.
Where's that movie? When do we eat or something, right? All right. Okay.